Hi there, welcome back to our time management course for pastors. This is session 7, which focuses on people versus tasks. So far we have looked at and examined concepts like keeping a weekly planner, making a weekly assessment, keeping your priorities straight, investing in your leadership, delegation, and the tyranny of the urgent. And today, again, we get to look at one of the most important challenges that a pastor will face, which is people versus tasks. There are, of course, in any church, in any pastoral ministry, a lot of things that need to get done, and then, of course, there are also people needs, right? There are people that need attention and time and demand resources as well. So, how do we balance between the people tasks or the people or the tasks, rather? So how do we balance between those two things? Well, interestingly, you're probably going to fall down in one of two categories on this. You're going to be a people person who wants to always prioritize people to the detriment of the things you need to get done, or you're going to be a task-oriented person who appreciates getting things accomplished and finds it more difficult to make time for people. And whatever you are, growing to a healthy balance in that regard is going to help encourage your ministry tremendously. So, we ask that big, important question: what is more important, people or tasks? You see, we know that people are made in the image of God, that people are the ones that grow. Churches don't grow. They grow in number maybe, but that's really of no value at all unless the people in it are spiritually growing and becoming more mature, able to serve and glorify God. So as we come to that understanding, we recognize that people are a priority of the Lord, right? The Lord made time to build up and died to save people. Jesus Christ didn't die just to get things accomplished, but to accomplish the salvation of individual persons. And that is important for us to recognize. If we get so far on the task side, then we will overlook, whether or not those tasks are effective in building people up. And yet, and we look on the other side, Christ if he'd not done the task of going to the cross and dying for sins, no one could be saved. So we see that tasks have import in serving people. So while we would probably have to make the statement that people are the priority and people are more important, we have to recognize that you can't serve people without accomplishing certain important tasks and priorities. So we ask the question: when do people need to outweigh tasks, and when do tasks need to outweigh people? Well, people will come into difficult situations, and as we discussed in a previous lesson on, charging ants and elephants, and walking ants and elephants, we find that some people will think that because of their self-absorption or whatever, that what they're personally facing or dealing with right now needs to be the most important thing in everyone's world. And so we need to have some discernment and recognize when something needs to be put in its appropriate place, right? Can it be dealt with? Does it need to be dealt with right now, or can it be dealt with later? But it's undeniable that people will come into situations where they need immediate help, and need immediate response and immediate care. So when that happens and they need that counseling, we have to recognize that is a rarity, right? Just as you don't run around hopefully from one crisis to another. If another person thinks they run around from one crisis to another, then they probably have a readjustment that needs to take place, and you can't live at the behest of people like that. Interacting with people tells us what tasks are most valuable, right? So when we are interacting with folks in our church and in our local congregation, we're able to find out, if the Wednesday evening service is having a positive effect, or if the men's study or the women's study has maybe kind of run its course and needs to be refreshed in some way. So if we don't interact with people, then we become disconnected from the importance of our tasks, and our tasks can become less effective as a result. So again, we recognize that there needs to be that people priority in everything. However, it is oftentimes best for people to make sure that tasks take priority over their immediate felt needs. So when the tasks serve people, the task needs to take priority. A great example of this is that the church needs to hear the Bible taught. It absolutely does. That is part of the function and the purpose of the church. That is part of what needs to happen so that the whole body can grow in the grace and knowledge of Christ. And so the task of preparing your sermon or your personal Bible study absolutely needs to take priority at certain times over personal needs and requirements or expectations. Next, the church needs a praying pastor and teacher. You cannot hope to be the spiritual example that you're meant to be and the spiritual leader that you're meant to be if you yourself aren't spending any time in prayer and in the Word and in your devotion. So understanding that by prioritizing all the people needs, you might squeeze out your personal devotion and growth in Christ, and thus become, if not disqualified, less capable, because you're doing it based on your own kind of latent resources versus relying on the Lord every single day. The church needs a growing pastor. That means putting time into your education, putting time into your personal ability to minister, whether that's going to conferences or taking courses, taking more seminary courses or advanced courses. You need to be advancing in your knowledge and your growth in Christ as well. And the church needs that of you, which means that time has to be made for that, and very frequently prioritized over that squash game that the lonely person wants to play, or whatever. Care for the church building, financial situation, otherwise often critical to the work of the church, right? If your church building becomes condemned because nobody was around to pay attention to that, then the church can't meet, and everything starts to become inconvenient or difficult to deal with. So oftentimes tasks like that are become important over, and the need might come to cancel a meeting or something because there's a need in the church administration that needs to be attended to. Time for planning and strategy is more likely to serve the body than unlimited personal availability. This is a big deal. As we've spoken about before, you need to have time to reflect on your week. You need to have time to dream and plan and think about what is it that's going to, where's the Lord leading the body? What does the body need, right? If you're not taking, obviously the time to be in touch with the body and the people and know where people are at, you can't make that assessment. But also, if you're not building time into your schedule to think about that and pray about that, then you're just going to have a totally reactive pastorate where you're just running around trying to meet felt needs in the time that they're desired or they make their demands. And that's not leadership, right? That's just doing triage all the time, and it's not ultimately very helpful. So obviously this takes us back to the importance of keeping that schedule. Every ministry, of course, is entirely unique, and the demands of your ministry will differ at different times, right? So at one point you'll have a great, fully functional group of people who volunteer and help, and another time those people will move away, get sick, pass away, whatever it is, and you'll wind up with a lot more on your plate in some other regard to compensate for that. But you need to recognize that you can't meet everybody's personal demands. There will always be someone who has an expectation that is completely unjustified biblically or just socially in reality, and you're going to have to disappoint some people. You're going to disappoint someone's expectations because their expectations were unreasonable, foolish, or even sinful. You're not responsible to be available whenever someone has a need. You need to just repeat that to yourself. You're not responsible to be available every time someone has a need. If you're engaged in an important task or an important conversation, then someone else might just have to wait. That's the way life is. And that's why it's so important to build up a team so that you're not always the only one on the hook. If you have someone else, you can say, hey, I'm unable to deal with this at this time. Can you call so-and-so, or can I set you up with such and such person who's been built up and equipped to do that? Because you're not God. You're only God's servant. You are here to do the things that you're able to do by His power, by His strength, in the context of the hours that He's given you and the place that He's given you. There will be tasks for which you're not equipped. There will be things for which you do not have the time or capacity. And if you can't kind of come to peace with that, you're going to have a painful ministry of constantly suffering at the expectations of others. Sometimes a person will have a need so great that a task cannot be accomplished. That will happen. And at that point, you might have to shuck and jive. It's not saying that there's not hard work in ministry and there won't be some late nights. There certainly have been in mine, and there will be, I imagine, in yours as well. But other times a task may be so important that a personal meeting needs to be canceled. I'm sorry, I lost my, something happened and I wasn't able to get my sermon prep time. I have to cancel our weekly meeting so that I can focus on that. Life is best when both are balanced, and there will be times when people try to throw off that balance, or tasks try to throw off that balance. But maintaining that balance between people and tasks is an important important act of introspection that every pastor has to undergo. So, might I introduce you to the idea of office hours? Based upon on schedule that you're already keeping, what time is available for meetings? How many meetings can you honestly fit in your schedule, and where will they fit, right? Does everybody need to be on a weekly meeting? Are there some that are monthly meetings or even quarterly meetings? Are there some that you just meet when, when the need arises in context with your schedule? It seems to me, for me, I don't know where this got built into me, but I got this idea that the weekly meeting was the ideal. It's not, unless that is the specific need. If that's someone that you're building up for leadership, yeah, a weekly meeting could be really a reasonable request. But if that's just a person who's lonely and just needs a friend, then you need to encourage them to find a friend. And if there are social problems that they're having that keep them from finding a friend, you need to help them address those issues. Maybe they're very self-absorbed, or they're a terror to be around. They're, awful or hurtful or angry or whatever it is. You need to help them by encouraging them to grow spiritually to the point where the only person who'll put up with them is not the person who's paid to put up with them as a pastor or something like that. So 4 hours of availability in your schedule, I think, is plenty. If you can make 4 hours of your week available, that's including travel time, right? And that's why you might take meetings at the church, but 4 hours a week for meetings, especially for open meetings, someone wants to see you or visit you, on a one-off, making 4 hours a week of availability is plenty. And making sure that you have that stated in your schedule. I have, from 12 to 4 on Wednesday afternoons, or, on Wednesday afternoons to meet with people, or I have lunches on Tuesday and Thursday that I can meet with people for lunch. But making that agreement with your schedule and with yourself is going to be helpful. If a person cannot meet you when you have availability, you don't have time to meet with them. It seems a little harsh, right? But in the reality of it is, there's no other situation. When someone wants to make a doctor's appointment, they will go and find the most convenient one for them, but ultimately they're at the mercy of the availability of their doctor, right? They can't just sit there and shout louder and all of a sudden, 7:30 on a Thursday night is going to be available to them. So if you don't have time to meet with them, and this is really important, because the more infrequent the exceptions you make, the more productive your ministry is going to be. And this is the critical thing. We might think, especially if you're of that kind of helper mentality where you just want to help everybody and, meet everybody's apparent felt needs. And I do. You're going to find it very difficult it's almost like a rejection, like you've let somebody down by not rearranging the world to meet their, again, felt need. But here's the reality. If you tell someone, I can meet between 1 and 4 on this day, or between whatever, on this evening, whichever time that you make available for those types of engagements, if someone's unable or unwilling to prioritize their demand, it's because their demand is not a real priority. If they want to meet entirely upon their schedule, entirely within what is their availability, then essentially what they're saying is that it's not important enough to move their schedule around. Many people will, take an hour off of work to go and get, have a doctor's appointment, or go take an hour off of work or out of whatever else they had scheduled to prioritize an oil change or an automotive appointment, right? And spiritual issues are more important than that. So you should feel no guilt at all for saying, look, I can't meet with you this time. We could have a phone call if you can just break away from work for 15 minutes or during your lunch hour or whatever it is. But making sure that you're not just allowing the body to dictate what your schedule can handle, right? Because ultimately you might be a routine person, you might not be a routine person. If you just open up your schedule to people and say, hey, just pick your time, I'll wake up at 3 a.m, or I'll be there till 10 at night or whatever, you're just going to get burnout. You're just going to get destroyed by it. So recognizing that if they have a real priority, they'll be willing to make a sacrifice to meet in a time that works for you as well. So don't misunderstand. I'm not suggesting we become unfeeling or unreactive to the needs of our body by any stretch of the imagination, but recognize that if you let that run you, and it won't be because they're so ill-intentioned or ill-willed, it'll be because they just assume that you're always available. And they need to be taught to understand that your time also is valuable, and you're filling your time with important things that serve the church body, and again, put you in a place to be that person, that pastor that is needed in that situation, because you're not going to be able to do that if all of your time has been sucked up with those felt needs, personal needs, where you're feel like you're just kind of at the behest of everyone else. So, very simply, ministry is about people, but there are a lot of tasks to complete for the ministry to be successful. If we fail to harmonize people and important tasks of ministry, then disaster is imminent. Carefully consider what time you give to each of those things and how it can be helped. So, your assignment is, in essay form, are you more likely to prioritize people or tasks? Do some self-reflection. What is it that you are excited to do, and what is it you go, is it, I have to do those, budget reports, or is it, that's good, I feel good getting it accomplished, or is it, someone's interrupting sermon time again, or is it, I have to make time for building my sermon again. Whatever it is that's your natural lean, recognize where it is, and then ask the question or answer the question, how can you best maintain balance in your ministry between these two important commitments? So, simple, easy concept, but really important for us as pastors to understand, because if we get kind of off kilter on one side or the other, we wind up moving towards a catastrophe in our pastoral ministry. May God richly bless you, and I hope your time management is being more adequately managed and worked to glorify God.